Charlotte went inside the house. The house was stuffy and cold on that overcast autumn day. It was an old house no one had lived in for a while and seemed to be falling apart. Everything was covered in thick layers of dust and spiderwebs. She went to the fireplace. Luckily, there were some logs nearby. Charlotte thanked her grandfather internally and went to start the fire. She found matches and paper and lit the fireplace. She tried to get a little warmer sitting there by the fire. There was a lump in her throat and tears in her eyes. Just a few weeks ago, Charlotte was the happiest girl in the world. And today, here she sat, next to the fireplace, abandoned in a cold home in a godforsaken town. In any case, it's better than staying on the street, she thought, wiping away her tears. It got dark outside, and Charlotte tried to turn on some lights, but nothing would turn on. She walked throughout the house, but it was dark everywhere. Not this, she thought sadly. It was already late, and she wouldn't be able to fix this problem, so she would spend the rest of the evening in the dark. She remembered she hadn't eaten all day. She got a sandwich out of her purse. She would go to expensive restaurants with her fiancé and pick foods she had never tried not that long ago. You get used to the good life fast. Charlotte found a rag, wiped dust off the table and a chair, and sat down. She wasn't hungry, but made herself eat the sandwich. The road was hard, and she didn't have the strength for anything else. She went into her former room, which smelled like dust and sweat. Despite her exhaustion, she couldn't sleep. She was hit by a wave of memories. She grew up in this small, poor town. She remembered how happy she was to move away. Charlotte's father worked at the factory and her mom in a small stand. The family didn't have much money. When the factory closed, her parents decided it was time to move away. They gathered their few belongings and decided to move. Charlotte stayed with her grandpa until her parents found an apartment and work in a big city. After they had everything set up, they drove to get their daughter, but got into a car accident that killed both of them. She was left with her grandfather, who did his best to raise her. He always told her to study hard to escape this dying place. Charlotte got into college after school. Even though she escaped the town that was almost devoid of young people with only elderly people remaining, Charlotte didn't forget her grandpa and always visited him on her breaks. She lived in a dorm. She was born with great fashion sense that she probably got from her mother. She loved to read magazines about fashion, interior design, and art during her free time. Her grandfather liked to drink and started drinking much more when he was left alone. However, Charlotte always treated him kindly. News of his sudden death hit her like a truck. Charlotte was now completely alone. She boarded up the house after the funeral and now visits it once a year. Charlotte was beautiful, educated, and well-raised. She always dressed well, even though her clothes were simple and inexpensive. It's possible the combination of these qualities helped her get a job as a secretary in a large construction company. There weren't many people seeking the job, and she was chosen despite her lack of experience. She was happy. Her lack of experience was compensated for her desire to work and learn. She learned fast, found common ground with her coworkers, and even became friends with some of them. She gave everything to her work. She was the first in and the last out. She did everything to give all her time to work and quickly became an irreplaceable assistant for her boss. She was more than his assistant. She was his lover. Charlotte's boss, James, was a very charming, attractive young man who was adored by the ladies. After 6 months of work, Charlotte replaced her wardrobe and bought more expensive, higher quality clothes. She also changed her hairstyle and started using makeup better. James started getting interested. This happened at a work party. James invited her to his house. Charlotte wound up in her boss's huge, luxurious apartment and eventually in his bed. But she didn't regret it. James had been her everything for a while, so ending up in his embrace was like fulfilling her dreams. James was Charlotte's first. Luckily, he felt the same about her. Charlotte was in seventh heaven. She loved him so much that she didn't even notice his bad qualities. James rented a nice apartment for Charlotte soon. The one she had been renting shocked him. He didn't understand how it was possible to live in such conditions, and he didn't want to meet up in his apartment for some reason. Charlotte now lived in a nice apartment downtown, wore expensive lingerie and trendy clothes, and used expensive makeup. James didn't skimp on beauty salons, since he thought his woman should look irresistible. Time went on, and James was satisfied, and Charlotte didn't presume to demand more. Then, she got a positive pregnancy test. She was scared to tell James. To her surprise, he took the news quite well. He said it was time to introduce her to his parents that had wanted grandkids for ages. Charlotte thought she was in a fairy tale with her beloved, a wedding and a child. Sometimes she couldn't believe what was happening to her. When she was to meet his parents, James asked her not to talk about her past in too much detail. "You don't have to tell them where you grew up. We'll say your parents had a small business before the accident. If you tell them the truth, they'll get all worked up. It's actually good you don't have relatives to ruin the impression at the wedding." Charlotte was so enraptured in her own happiness, she didn't look for any meaning in his words and just agreed to what he said. James's parents' house was unreal. It was a house Charlotte had only seen in movies or on magazine covers. James's father was a big, famous businessman in the city. He helped his son open his own business, and James was able to use some startup money. They welcomed Charlotte and were restrained and well-mannered. When they heard about the pregnancy, they decided without asking that the wedding would be in their house, and they would organize everything as grandiose as possible. "Good job back there. I didn't expect that. They accepted you," James said on the drive home. His mother did the wedding preparations. She decided what would be worn, and she even picked out a set of wedding dresses for Charlotte to choose from. Charlotte didn't ask anyone anything. She didn't get involved and just silently watched how her life was changing around her. One morning, Charlotte heard the door open. It was James. She said hello and wanted to hug him, but noticed his strange expression. She had never seen him so angry. "Did something happen, dear?" she asked shyly. "Yes," he answered rudely. "At least I'm happy it happened now, before the wedding. There won't be a wedding." Charlotte looked at James with wide eyes. She had no idea what he was talking about. "James, please tell me what you're talking about. What's happening?" "Don't act innocent. You thought I was an idiot. You thought you'd get married while sleeping around?" Charlotte was petrified. She didn't know what he was accusing her of and was so shocked she didn't know what to say. "Get your things and get out of here," James said, opening the closet. "Actually, there's not much for you to get. I bought everything here for you. Take a couple of things so you don't walk around naked and get out. And by the way, you're fired." Charlotte barely kept herself from shaking. She didn't even think to say that she had brought many of the things herself with money she earned. The money was hers. She put everything into the company. All her strength and all her energy, without taking a break. She thought this must have been a nightmare, that she would wake up and everything would be normal. But unfortunately, it wasn't. Before she left, Charlotte stopped and said, "James, what about our baby? This is a mistake. Let's talk this out." "Our baby? I have no idea who got you pregnant, and I don't want someone else's baby. Leave." "I have the right to know what's happening, and I'm not leaving until you explain," Charlotte resisted, surprising even herself. But she couldn't expect what happened next. James grabbed her arm hard and tossed her out the door. Then he threw her purse after her. When she was getting up, he stopped her and demanded the ring back. Charlotte took it off and gave it back. He slammed the door in her face. She was alone without any family or friends. The only person she could turn to was Miranda, a friend from college. Miranda said she could stay with her for a short time. It was a short time because her lease would be up in 2 weeks, and a woman who had just lost her job couldn't afford the rent and would be moving to her parents soon. Charlotte immediately began to look for a job. She had little money left because she had spent most of it on the wedding. However, there was an unpleasant surprise waiting for her. She couldn't get a recommendation from work, and it turned out that James and his father were both powerful businessmen in the city and made sure she couldn't get a job. After trying dozens of companies, Charlotte realized there was nothing for her here. So, she was alone, penniless, homeless, jobless, and pregnant. She was distraught. All she could do was go back to that abandoned house in that godforsaken town that she was so elated to escape from. Miranda took her to the bus and put a couple $100 in her pocket. "That's all I can do. I'm sorry." They hugged each other tightly, and Charlotte thanked her for her help and went on her way. It was a long road, and then a long walk from the bus to the house. She was worried that something had happened to the house. It was old, and no one had lived in it for a while, so it could have fallen apart. Charlotte was absolutely crushed and couldn't imagine how to keep going on. Thankfully, she worried for nothing, and the house was decrepit, but standing. She wrapped herself in several blankets to sleep and woke up when she heard a man's voice. She jumped out of the bed and saw a stranger standing in the doorway. "The owner has returned," he said, surprised. "You didn't close the door and the curtains were moved, so I thought some burglars or bandits had come in, and I decided to check. I'm Michael. I live in the center near the food stall. I bring food to your neighbors sometimes and was passing by." The appearance of the stranger initially scared Charlotte. Then she got angry that the stranger burst into her home. Next, she calmed down and started getting uncomfortable. There was a tall, athletic, handsome young man in front of her, and Charlotte hadn't washed her face or done her hair. "I'm Charlotte," she said, a little embarrassed. "You're Mr. Ryan's granddaughter? I visited him often, and he told me a lot about you." "I am. I got here yesterday. I need to get the house in order, and there's no electricity." "Electricity? I could take a look." "You know what you're doing?" Michael only smiled in response. After about 30 minutes, he was finished, and there was light. Charlotte offered to pay Michael for his work, but he said he didn't need her money and was just being neighborly. He said if she needed any help, she could go to him. She was busy straightening up the house for the next couple of days. She was so busy she forgot about her sad thoughts. That changed in the evening when she couldn't get her last encounter with James out of her head. She didn't believe that her whole life fell apart in an instant and just had one question in her mind. Why? Charlotte went to buy food from the store one day. She met Michael there and he helped carry her bags home. They talked on the way back and Charlotte learned that Michael lived in the city. He moved here for his mom, who was sick and refused to move to live with him. Michael was an architect and could work remotely, so he moved here to take care of his mom. Michael helped Charlotte often. The home was old and he was very helpful. She felt uneasy and wanted to pay him somehow. One day when Charlotte offered to pay him another time, Michael said, "Okay, if you want to pay, let's trade favors. I need to go to the city for work for a couple days. I want to ask you to look after my mom. I used to ask my neighbor, but she's getting older and it's hard to trust her." Charlotte was happy she could help Michael. Michael's mom was very sweet and kind. They got along famously, and Charlotte became a frequent guest in their home. One day while watching Michael work on another home, Charlotte got interested and said what she thought about the interior. Michael was surprised that her advice was good and useful, so he offered Charlotte a side job. He was an architect but wasn't good at interior design. He brought her some things to read from the city, installed a special program on her computer, and helped her learn it. Considering she had always been interested in fashion trends and design, she was delighted to learn more about this topic and could do some work for Michael. It didn't pay much, but it was enough to live on. Charlotte kept remembering James and her previous life, but the hurt had lost its sting. One day she noticed a car outside her home when she came home from a walk. The car was familiar. It was Robert, James's assistant. Charlotte was surprised by the visit, but still invited him inside. "It was hard work to find you. And you were way out here. I don't understand. How do people live like this?" Robert said, coming inside. "People live in much worse conditions than these," Charlotte said, looking at her guest, furrowing her brow. Despite its age, the house was spotless and very cozy thanks to Charlotte's work. "Hey, don't get upset. It's my problem. Do you miss the city?" Robert asked cautiously. "No, not anymore," she answered calmly and truthfully. Charlotte looked at her guest inquisitively and let him know it was time to explain his strange visit. He told her that he left the company and opened his own. He was able to get a few clients and wanted to give Charlotte her life back. Robert offered her a position in his company. If he had offered a couple weeks ago, she would have packed her things without thinking. But now, she thought about how she had made a deal with Michael to go to the city, get some construction material, and remodel the house. She also had an unfinished project. She couldn't just up and leave everything. Robert scowled, not understanding. He expected a different reaction. "Why aren't you answering?
Do you mean to say you like living out here? Or do you think you can go back to James and his company? Forget about that.
Robert was getting angry.
Do you even know why he threw you out of his life and company like a dog?
Robert hadn't planned on telling Charlotte what happened, but was angry and laid it all out. James, before the wedding, decided to test Charlotte and make sure she was the right choice and worthy of being his wife. He asked Robert to make a pass at her and watch her reaction.
Remember when I brought you flowers and your favorite sweets?
Charlotte remembered something, but the problem was that she never gave any particular meaning to those things, since Robert had always showered her with compliments and signs of affection since she began working at the company. Charlotte always thought it was gratitude for something, and sometimes she protected Robert from James, like being late to meetings, forgetting to meet with clients, or losing documents. She rescheduled meetings or restarted negotiations, not for Robert, but for the company and to protect herself from internal and external conflicts.
You never paid me any attention, so I came up with something. I went to my good friend. She's about your height and had a similar body shape and hairstyle. We took a few sensitive pictures together in bed, and I showed them to James. There were no faces in the pictures, of course, but I thought he would realize it wasn't you, and I would say it was a prank. But James didn't figure it out. I showed him in the evening, and you were gone the next morning.
Charlotte couldn't believe what she was hearing. She didn't understand how someone could be capable of this. Why? Why did you do that?
My God, because I loved you, and still do. I fell in love with you the moment you started working for the company. Naturally, you chose James, and I couldn't compete. I'm sorry, but I hated you and him for that. So when I got the chance, I took it. Now you're single, and I'm ready to marry you right now. I'm ready to accept you. Come with me, and we'll build the company together.
Charlotte saw red. She was surprised, most of all, that the person who ruined her life felt no regret and seemed to actually be proud. And James? She thought he loved her. She was loyal to him throughout their relationship and never opposed him or objected to him. And he decided to test her and dump her like a useless thing without investigating? Get out of my house. Charlotte barely found the strength to say even this.
What, you're tossing me out? I'm ready to put everything at your feet. Who needs you here? You're just rotting in this hole.
Get out! Charlotte said with anguish in her voice. Michael showed up at that moment.
What's happening here? Is everything okay, Charlotte?
Robert went red in anger when he saw him.
I get it.
Robert rushed out and drove off. Charlotte felt sick. Michael sat next to her and rubbed her hair. He didn't ask anything. She told him everything that had happened since she had been a young girl who moved away.
Don't worry, everything will be fine. We'll go see a doctor when we go to the city. You need to think about your baby,
Michael said to calm her down. Charlotte wasn't afraid with his support. After remodeling the house, it was fantastic. Charlotte celebrated Christmas with Michael and his mom. She didn't know what would come next, but she didn't want anything to change. The phone rang one day. It was a call she had been waiting for not so long ago. Her heart jumped in her chest. She picked it up. It was James. He told her that he ran into Robert, and they had a fight about business, and that Robert told him everything. James finished by saying he was wrong, and he should have investigated, but believed Robert, who turned out to be untrustworthy. But now he knew the truth and was ready to start over. Charlotte quietly listened until the end. Due to her silence, James asked if she could hear him. I hear you. There's nothing left keeping us together.
Wait, what do you mean? What about our baby?
Our baby? When you tossed me out, it wasn't yours. It's my baby now, just mine. Not everything in life obeys your wishes and plans.
Wait, what are you talking about? I said I was wrong.
James said, interrupting her. James, listen, forget my number and don't call again. James was shocked. Charlotte had never spoke to him like this before and wasn't obeying like she used to. Charlotte hung up and realized she didn't regret what she did. Thanks to Michael, she had seen how men could act and how relationships could be completely different. That's not something money can buy. Even if Michael was always just a friend, he'd always be there. Charlotte was distracted by a knock on the door. Michael came in. He looked different today. What happened? Charlotte asked, scared. He looked her in the eyes and said they needed to talk. He had put this off for a long time.
Every time I come to visit, my heart leaps out of my chest. I'm terrified I'll come and he won't be here. I don't want to lose you. I always want you to be with me. I can't live without you. I promise I'll be an excellent father to your child, and it will be our child. Charlotte, please, marry me.
Charlotte started crying. She went to him and hugged him as hard as she could. It was a yes. It was the beginning of their new, happy life. Maybe it had begun on that cold autumn morning when Michael first appeared on her doorstep. They got married and lived together a week later. Charlotte gave birth to a baby girl soon after, and Michael's mom got better, so they all moved to the city. But they went back to the town when they first met and where their family was born every summer.